Guys, we are talking about pulmonology. The lecture now is the respiratory membrane and Fick's law of diffusion. So let's do that. This might actually be a couple of questions that will be covered in the USMLE. So let's do it. First of all, we need to understand what is the respiratory membrane. So we have done this that as the air moves in, it goes through the respiratory airways, which is trachea, then bronchi, then smaller bronchi. Finally, we reach the bronchioles, then we reach respiratory bronchioles. So let's say this is a respiratory bronchiole, which then opens up in a sac, alveolar sac, which has alveoli attached to it, right? And then there is blood supply in this area, and so that is the respiratory zone. We've done that in the histology. I don't want to waste your time here. I am going to take one of this alveolus and draw it here. So let's say here is the alveolus. What do we have in the alveolus? Number one, the innermost layer is the fluids. These fluids also have surfactant in them, right? So this is not just water and ions and stuff, it has surfactant as well. Then this is the epithelial layer, right? So there are epithelial cells of alveoli pneumocytes, type 1, and then 10% of the cells are type 2 pneumocytes, type 2 pneumocytes, and then there are type 1 pneumocytes. Really thin system. How thin? I'll explain that in a second. Let me do that right now. If you take an adult person's lungs, my lungs, and you spread them, it actually makes about 70 square meter surface area. What does that mean? That means if you take a room that is, that is 25 by 30, so 25 feet by 30 feet, like a living room normally, and if you spread the lungs on it, they would cover the whole floor of it. And here is even more shocking thing. See, I've gotten this little measuring cup here, and this measuring cup may be showing you about 50-60 milliliter of water in it. Let's call it blood. What is the stroke volume normally in a healthy person? About 70 milliliter, right? So this is 60. I can make it 70 or so. So that is the stroke volume, about 70. Normally lungs at any time are filled from 60 to 160 milliliter, depending upon what the person is doing and his size and cardiac output and so on. But this is the amount of blood present in the lungs at one time. Right now, this is the blood. This is the blood that is, if I take this blood, and let's say my room right now is 25 by 25, so let's make it 25 by 30, I have to spread this blood. I have to spread this blood throughout this floor. How thin layer will I make? One molecule thick layer. I can't physically do it. If I spill that over here, it will just get absorbed and be done. This is the total blood that is needed to do the gaseous exchange in 30 by 25 feet room. So please remember that. It's such an interesting thing. But that is why the gaseous exchange is so rapid as well. Blood comes in, air comes in and exchange happens and air goes out. We exchange about 4 liters of oxygen per minute. Okay, so here pneumocyte type 2, pneumocyte type 1. Then under the pneumocyte, we know that all cells that are surface cells usually have basement membrane under them, always have basement membrane. So this is the basement membrane. Then underneath the basement membrane is the interstitial tissue. I want to make that green as well, so make sure that you can differentiate between the basement membrane and the interstitial tissue. So this is the interstitial tissue, that is this one. This is the basement membrane. Which basement membrane? This is the epithelial basement membrane. Okay. Then what do we get? Then let's say we have a blood vessel. So if we have a blood vessel, we're going to have the basement membrane for that blood vessel. I'm going to make it black. So here is the basement membrane for the endothelial cells. Then will be the blood vessel endothelium itself, capillary. So there are the endothelial cells present, right, on other sides of the capillary as well. And then is the blood plasma, and then in there are the RBCs. And I make the RBC like it is squeezing through this because RBC actually do get squeezed. They are 8 micrometer, the capillary diameter is 5 micrometer, this is 5 micrometer. So RBC actually becomes like this. When it is going through the capillary, blood is pushing it, and RBC almost becomes like this. It gets stuck and it is pushed through the capillary. This also allows the gases to directly enter the RBC instead of going into the plasma and then going into the RBC. Okay, so now let's see what is this membrane made up of. Oxygen has to travel from the fluid layer. It is water soluble, so it would do that. Then through the lipid membrane, and again it very easily moves through the lipid. It is actually lipid soluble as well. Carbon dioxide is 20 times more soluble in water than oxygen, but they both are lipid soluble. Carbon monoxide is lipid soluble, nitrogen is lipid soluble. So they'll pass through the cells easily. Then they'll pass through the interstitium, then they'll pass through the basement membrane of the endothelium, then the endothelial cells, and either inside directly the RBC or out in the plasma, and then from there to the RBC. So what we have to talk about is, what is this membrane made up of? Because this is the critical membrane. This is the area that keeps us alive and functioning when it is functioning. If it doesn't function, we have respiratory problems. So we have to see what is this structure, and if this structure is disrupted, if it is sick, if it is pathological, then what happens to breathing? And then what did Fick say that how the diffusion of the gases happen? So let's start with this one. First of all, the diffusion of the gas happens from higher concentration to the lower concentration. So if you said, well, what is that? Higher concentration, more molecules over here. Do these molecules sitting here know that we are 20 over here and 3 over there, so we should go from here to here? They have brains? No, they are actually moving in all direction. These guys are moving in that direction as well. The only thing is, these are so many. Higher concentration means there are so many that the molecules moving in this direction are more than the molecules that are here moving in that direction. So maybe the magnitude or the number of molecules accidentally moving in this direction from here is much more because the concentration is more than the oxygen molecule accidentally moving towards this direction are lesser because oxygen is less over here. So these molecules don't have brains to say, oh, I'm in higher concentration here, so I'll run over there. No, it's just that they're moving in all directions, and accidental direction is from higher to the lower, which makes sense. It's natural. So what Fick's law, what that tells us is what factors determine the movement of the gas. So let's look at that quickly. The definition, the equation over here is, so this is the diffusion ratio or rate of diffusion of a gas. It depends upon the area of the membrane through which it is diffusing. So what does that mean? Guys, it is very simple. If this is the, let me make it here, if this is the membrane through which, let's say this is a membrane, if this is the membrane through which these molecules have to pass, and let's say there are thousands of molecules here, and let's say in this membrane there are only 5 holes through which they can pass, then they have to take turns. Few of them will pass, then the next will pass, and then the next will pass. Can we increase their rate? Can we move more? Yes. How? Make the membrane big. Okay. Right? So that is one way. So that is what this. So rate of diffusion is directly proportional to the surface area available to move the gas. Okay. So how can we increase the surface area in the lungs? Do exercises. When you are exercising, surface area actually increases. Why? Because some part of the lung is usually not functioning because we are at rest. So when you are working out, then the surface area opens up, blood vessels open up, capillaries open up, alveoli open up, and the surface area increases. Okay. Can we reduce the surface area? Pathology? Yes. How can we reduce the surface area? Destroy the alveoli. How can I destroy the alveoli? Smoke, smoke, smoke. Smoke, 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 man. Asbestos, toxic substances, smog, dust, pollution, allergies, asthmas, pneumonias, repeated infections, genetic problems. All of those can destroy the alveoli. When the alveolus is destroyed, let's say this is an alveolus that is destroyed. Is this area now working? No. Is this surface area available to function? No. Surface area gone down, diffusion rate will go down. In the emphysema, smokers, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, what happens is not only the alveoli are destroyed, even the smaller airways are obstructed as well. So now the gas is not coming in. So is this surface area available to do the exchange? No. Right? Okay. How about, so emphysema is one, atelectasis is another. These things would cause collapse of the tissue. How about pneumothorax? Yes, pneumothorax, we have done the pneumothorax separately. Pneumothorax would collapse the lung. The area that is collapsed will not do the function. When that is not functioning, surface area is gone. How about if I do not have, so let's hold on to that one. How about thickness? Thickness of this membrane. If I make this membrane thicker, will it be easy to pass through it? No, the membrane has become thicker now. How can I make the membrane thicker? Look, what are the parts of the membrane? RBCs, plasma, endothelium, basement membrane, interstitium, basement membrane, endothelium, fluid. So check this out. First way of making it thick, write it down somewhere. You can cause edema. Pulmonary edema will cause increase in thickness of the respiratory membrane. It would create edema, will put water in the interstitial space and increase water in the alveoli. Depends upon the type and the intensity of the edema. So that of course has now caused a thicker membrane to pass through. Now this is a physical problem. This is a structural problem. Surface area was also structural problem or structural. In this Fick's law, you have two structural parameters that you can change and you have two gas parameters that you can change. So we are talking about structural parameters, surface area and the thickness of the membrane. How can we change the thickness? By causing fibrosis, by causing edema. Fibrosis means what? More collagen sits here, more elastin sits here, scarring happens, inflammatory tissue is present, inflammatory cells are present, repair cells are present, repair tissue is present, smooth muscles are present, dead tissues are present, right? So this whole thing is thicker now. How about exercise? Will it make it thick or thin? Actually, it is funny that when you are doing exercise, you are actually opening up because you're breathing deeply. That stretches these membranes and make them thin. So exercise actually makes the surface area, the thickness of the membrane is reduced. Okay, so that is the thickness. What are the factors that are affecting the thickness? Fibrosis, edema, and exercise. You should just know that exercise actually makes it thin instead of thick, right? And how about surface area? What increases the surface area? Exercise. What decreases the surface area? Tell me, emphysema, atelectasis, any obstruction to the bronchial tissue, pneumothorax, these would all reduce it. Okay. Now let's go to the gas factors. There are two parameters here. One, this D represents the gas's own diffusion constant. Every gas has a diffusion constant. It's a really long story that how do we find that out. Normally it's difficult to find the diffusion constant inside the lungs. So normal way to measure is, if you have to, you're sitting in a research area, if you have to measure it, you use carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide diffuses very quickly. It diffuses 100%. It goes to the blood and goes directly to the hemoglobin, right? It has great affinity for hemoglobin. So normally you give a small bolus of carbon monoxide, which is, you know, tagged, and then you follow that and you see when it comes back what is the concentration, and from there you extrapolate that how much diffusion is occurring. Then from carbon monoxide you extrapolate oxygen and carbon dioxide. How do we know that? Carbon dioxide diffusion is almost the same as oxygen, and carbon monoxide diffusion is the same as oxygen, and carbon dioxide is 20 times greater. So if you can find out carbon monoxide diffusion, then you can extrapolate oxygen, which is almost equal, and then you can extrapolate carbon dioxide, which is 20 times more. So diffusion constant of a gas would also, and what does it base on? Diffusion constant normally is based on solubility of the gas and the molecular weight. These are the parameters. Again, we don't care too much. Just remember this, that solubility is really important, and we talked about it in our last lecture, that there are some gases that like to become dissolved in water and their pressures are low, and if the pressure is low, then the gradient will not be established properly. And some gases do not dissolve in water. They stay out even when sitting in the water. They're like dying, and you know, so somebody who does not know to swim, if you throw him in the water, he'll flail around and he'll kick and scream. So that is a non-dissolving gas present in the water having high pressure. Okay, so can we change this? Normally gas constants are constant. You can't go in and say, you know what, I'm going to change oxygen solubility, or I'm going to change oxygen's molecular weight. So normally you don't do that. How about the pressure gradient? Pressure gradient can be changed, right? And we can actually do hyperbaric pressure. So pressure gradient is really the gradient between alveolars, so PA, and then gas, let's use oxygen, and the pressure of oxygen here. And this pressure of oxygen in the blood will be the pressure exerted by the oxygen molecules present in the plasma, not in the RBC or on hemoglobin. Same is the case for the PCO2. The pressure is exerted by the gas that is present in the plasma. Now the gas present in the plasma is in two states. One is dissolved with the water and one is free. It is the free one that is causing the pressure. Dissolved one is sort of backup. So now the pressure gradient from this is P1, this is P2. So for example, we know that the pressure here for oxygen is 100, right? We did that in our last lecture. PaO2 is 100, and PO2 here, when it comes in, when the blood, the capillaries, venous end is used for the pressure measurements. So when the blood comes to the venous end, it is the oxygen here is about 40 millimeters of mercury. So where is the gradient? So 100 minus 40 is 60. This is the 60 pressure gradient that would move it. Can we change that? As I said, yes. Go to higher altitude, pressure would become lower. Go to the hyperbaric chamber and pressure would become higher. Go into the sea, the pressure would become higher, but don't inhale that. Okay, how about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is the other way around. Higher pressure here, 47, less pressure here, 40. So if you subtract them, it's a negative outcome, which means the carbon dioxide would move from here to here. Again, can we change that? Yes, by going to higher altitude or lower altitudes. So that is how the Fick's law of diffusion tells us the factors, two structural factors and two gas factors governing the movement of the gas. Why is this important clinically? Emphysema, asthma, alveolar damage, atelectasis, fibrosis, tumors, obstruction of the bronchi, edema, heart failures, ischemic heart diseases, which is the most common disease in United States. 25% of the patients have the heart attacks every year. So all of those would cause problems here. And you would see the thickness would increase and that would cause problem. Cool. Thank you very much.